Okay, so I'm going to talk about how to add public transport, how to specify public transport routes in RTran. So I've got the user input spreadsheet open that RTran always reads in to run, and I've actually just gone with the default sheet, the default one that comes with RTran. There's a user input sheet that comes with RTran that has some bus routes and everything specified. It looks like this. If you go to the sheet called bus all frequency, it'll specify a whole bunch of bus routes. But let's just get rid of these because I want to show you how to specify bus routes from scratch without relying on what's already there. So the first thing to do is let's just get rid of all the bus routes that are there. And you do that in order to specify that nothing is happening, there is no bus route. You just need a dash, so a minus sign essentially in every square. So you see in the Excel spreadsheet now, which I'll actually make bigger so you can see it properly, each of the cells or the traffic zones, so each of these cells represents a traffic zone, and each of them is now just got a minus sign or a dash in it, and that indicates that there's no bus route running through it. So now I've deleted all the existing bus routes and I just have all dashes here. I'm going to show you how to specify a bus route. So if you want to say that there's a bus route that starts, let's say at this square here, that's x equals 3, y equals 10, you need to say what the name of the bus route is. I'm going to call it bus 1. And then you need to say what the route of that bus is. And to do that, you just say which squares the bus services. So this shows the bus kind of winding its way through various suburbs and terminating there. So that is a bus route. Bus number 1 is specified. And this just by having the name bus 1 in the squares, it tells you the route that bus 1 takes. So that's basically all you need to do to specify a bus route. I can then add another one here. I need to give it a different name. I'll give it bus 2, so I'm very creative with names like that. And let's say this bus route does something like this. Oops. Like that. So there we've added 2 bus routes. Bus number 1 goes along here. Bus number 2 does this route. The only thing that we're missing, you'll notice from each bus route, is a frequency. So you need to say how many services an hour the bus route is. So you do that by just having an additional number. So I'll say bus 1, I put a space in after bus 1, and I'll say, let's say it runs 6 services an hour, so a bus every 10 minutes. And that's it. And you only have to do this, specify the frequency on one of the squares. So I don't need to specify anywhere else along the bus 1 route. Just in one of the squares, I need to specify what the frequency of the bus service is. And that's it, to specifying a bus route basically. So I better do the frequency for bus 2 as well. Let's say that runs a little more infrequently. Let's say it runs 3 services an hour, bus 2. So now I've added 2 bus services running at 6 services an hour for bus 1 and 3 services an hour for bus 2. The other thing I should mention is that these bus routes are assumed, or all bus routes in RTran are assumed bidirectional. So there's one bus 1 consists of a service going this way, following the mouse, and at the same time a service coming back the other way at 6 services an hour. So it's always an inbound and an outbound service running along that route, and both of them have the same frequency. So bus 1 is really 6 services an hour in each direction. Now, you may wonder how you specify overlapping bus routes. So if I wanted to have, let's say, bus 3, and I wanted to have that route come down here and cross over where bus 1 is in this cell here, I can do that just by separating the two by a comma. So that says bus 1 and bus 3 both go through that square. And so there I've specified a bus route, bus 3. It actually crosses over the bus routes bus 1 and bus 2. It crosses over bus route 2 in a couple of places. But that's fine. As long as where it crosses over you separate the services with a comma, that's fine. So the last thing I need to do is specify the frequency of bus 3. So let's say that runs at 6 services an hour as well. Well, there is one constraint now that I think about it that I should mention. And just to talk about this constraint, I might just delete these bus routes. When you specify a bus route, some bus routes are illegal in RTran, so you're not allowed to have a bus route that is disconnected, like that. So here we have bus 1 travelling along here, and then it skips these two squares and then continues there. So that's not allowed. Besides discontinuities that I've told you before that you're not allowed to have in bus routes, you're not allowed to have branches in bus routes. So if you've got a bus route bus 1 like this, you're not allowed to branch the route out, say, to the left and the right, like that. So you're not allowed to branch or merge bus routes. That's an illegal bus route. Lastly, and this is really a special case of a branch, but just to make it really clear, you're not allowed to have a loop as part of a bus route unless that's the only part of the bus route. So here, effectively, this looks like a branch to RTran, like bus 1's running along here, it gets to here, and the route branches left and right. So this looks like a branch bus route to RTran and is not allowed. You are allowed just to have a simple loop. So if you got rid of that part, this no longer looks like a branch to RTran, so that's perfectly legal. You're just looping around in a circle, so loop routes like that are allowed. You're just not allowed to have any spurs coming off the loop route, because then it looks like the loop is branching. Last restriction in RTran. It also looks like a branch if I were to loop back like this. So let's say I started bus 1 here, bus 1 starts here, it goes along this route here. So far that's fine for the bus route. But if I were to come back like that, so that looks like it could be a loop bus route with nothing in the middle, but it looks like a branch bus route to RTran. RTran can't tell the difference. Say if the bus is here, it can't tell whether the next step on the bus route is here or here. It can't tell if the bus is here whether the next step is either here, here or here. There are 3 possibilities. So that sort of setup will confuse RTran. In general, you might like to think of the rule as each square that bus 1 runs in can have at most 2 neighbouring squares that bus 1 also runs along. The last thing I should mention is, as you saw before, when you have overlapping bus routes, that you can imagine if you have a lot of bus routes, the spreadsheet gets quite complicated. So if you have bus 1 and then bus 2 is overlapping with bus 1, and then you have a bus 3 coming in, and that might overlap with bus 2 and bus 1. You can see that the spreadsheet can start to get quite difficult to read and cumbersome to specify. So that's fine. So you can have as many bus routes in here as you like, but it gets very crowded. So RTran does allow you to split your bus routes up into separate sheets. You can specify one bus route like this, bus 1. Oops, like that. I'll just do the specification properly with a frequency. And then I could create another sheet. So here you'll see I've created a sheet called bus 2 frequency, and I could put another bus here. So bus 2 could be specified in this sheet. So here I've got a bus all frequency and a bus 2 frequency sheet, and I just created this bus 2 frequency sheet. So you can create as many sheets as you like to specify your bus routes. The only restriction is it has to begin, the sheet name has to begin with the word bus and end with the word frequency. You can have anything you like in the middle. So I could, for example, rename this sheet to bus 1 frequency, because it's just specifying bus 1, and bus 2 frequency specifies bus 2. So I could create a separate sheet in the workbook for each bus route. It's generally a bad idea, having one bus route per sheet, but you may want to split your bus routes up into multiple sheets if you have a lot of bus routes overlapping and it's hard to keep track of them. So that's bus routes. Now let's move to trains. So trains are the same, you specify them in the same way as buses, and they have the same restrictions in terms of branching. So here you'll see it's called mainline and it's got a frequency of 10. And in other respects, trains are just like buses. So RTran will treat them differently because trains won't suffer from traffic congestion. They move at the speeds specified in train speeds. So you've got a train speeds sheet, which is different to the road speeds sheet. So think of the train speeds sheet as specifying the speed that trains run on. They're a special mode that run at this speed and are unaffected by the road network. They have their separate network. Apart from that difference though, you specify trains in exactly the same way as buses. So you need to specify a frequency and you need to specify the route. They're assumed to be bidirectional. All train lines are assumed to be bidirectional, and you're not allowed to do any branching or merging of lines. You have to have separate lines. They can overlap, but you need to give them separate names then. So you could call this the north line. Let's say also running at a frequency of 10. And where it overlaps here, I'll have to say north line, and that's perfectly fine. That's not a branch. It's only if I tried to have the main line go both south and east here, that would be an issue. And that's really it for trains. Trains are exactly the same as buses. You can also, the same as buses in that you can create additional sheets. So I could create, I'll do that now. I'll create a copy of this sheet. So I have to rename it, and the naming convention is similar to buses. So it's got to start with the word train, it's got to end with the word frequency, but in between I can call it whatever I like. So I'm going to call it train foo frequency, and that would be perfectly fine. So I could specify one line in the train frequency, and I could specify other lines in the train foo frequency spreadsheet. I couldn't do this though. I couldn't say that there was a mainline service. I'd need to specify a different route, of course, because otherwise I'm just duplicating. And that's really it for specifying the routes. And you've got to be quite careful in that. If I were to accidentally have 0 kilometers an hour, let's say for this square here, or in Excel notation that's G5, that square. And if I go back to train frequency, you'll see G5 is where the train runs. But you're saying the train runs across the square where it travels at 0 kilometers an hour, and that's going to cause RTran to crash potentially, or else produce really silly results. So whenever you specify a train route, you've got to make sure that you adjust the train speeds sheet so that it's actually a sensible route. It runs along locations where it does actually travel at speeds other than 0 kilometers an hour.